As I'm sure you probably already know, ever since it was revealed that Pokemon Sword and Shield won't have the national dex, fans everywhere have been going haywire, with many of them declaring to boycott the games entirely. A lot of hardcore Pokemon fans are calling this a baby move, but I think caring about what other people are doing with their money's the real baby move. Because if somebody's unhappy with a product for any reason at all, I think it's pretty obvious they shouldn't buy it. But then there's the people who want to boycott the games and still play them anyway by getting used copies instead of new ones. And if you ask my festively plump rump, I think that's just downright silly. So sit back in your YouTube viewing chair, ask your dad to take you to see Monster Trucks on Sunday, remind him that kid seats are still just $5, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's most top-heavy full-grown boy Cameron, to tell you why buying Pokemon Sword and Shield out of spite sends Game Freak the wrong message. Alright, so I'm pretty sure I've already gotten some dukes dropped in the comments while the intro was playing by people who think I'm defending Sword and Shield, but I totally understand why half the fanbase is frustrated with Game Freak. Along with there being an undisclosed number of old Pokemon you can't transfer into the new games, they also got rid of Mega Evolutions and Z-moves, which makes it feel pointless we ever got them in the first place. And even though I always say graphics are less important now than ever before, it's pretty obvious that Sword and Shield are phoning them in. Some people say that Pokemon games have always looked bad, but just because the series has always been on handhelds, that doesn't mean Game Freak wasn't pushing the hardware to the limits. Every time Pokemon debuted on a new console, it was always mind-blowing compared to the last games. So when you compare Sword and Shield, even to X and Y, I think it's understandable for fans to feel underwhelmed. I mean, the Pokemon franchise makes billions of dollars an hour, and even Game Freak has another game on the Switch in development called Town that looks way better. So yeah, I do understand why people are upset, but I think they went way too far when they took it all out on this poor tree. Before anybody says another word about the tree, just know that this poor thing's been doing 8-hour therapy sessions every day just to cope with the comments from you savages out there. Anyway, if you really are disappointed with Sword and Shield though, then your absolute best option to send Game Freak a message is to completely skip out on the games altogether. Because memes and complaints can only go so far, but at the end of the day, if the games are still making as much money as they were before, then nothing's ever gonna change. Which brings us to today's topic of buying games used instead of new. A lot of people think buying used copies is still gonna send the same message, and yeah, it will result in Game Freak making a little less money, which is a step in the right direction. But I think this really waters the message down significantly. It's like the time I broke up with my ex-wife Chili for banging the janitor at Circuit City while I was locked out of the house. I didn't want the breakup to last forever or anything, but I really wanted to communicate to my wife that I didn't like what she was doing. But when I kept unsuccessfully making advances toward her in the bedroom despite the supposed breakup, she didn't see any reason to change her mischievous ways. Buying Sword and Shield used and still putting 20 to 30 hours of your life into it only tells Game Freak that at the end of the day, you really aren't that angry. Because if you're gonna play the games anyway, then that means the quality's high enough that you're completely powerless to resist them. That's the worst possible way I could put it, but that doesn't really make the statement untrue, does it? I do understand the appeal of wanting to deny Game Freak direct profit by buying used, because I actually considered doing this for some of the physical Switch releases that required 90% of the content be downloaded to the cartridges. But I ultimately felt like it'd be hypocritical, so I ended up either avoiding them altogether or just buying the full versions in Japan. And even then, my gripe wasn't with the actual games, just the way they were distributed. It was clear as day that I thought the games themselves were still good. Although, it'd be a different story altogether if you found Sword and Shield used or even new for $10 to $20 or something like that. Because like the PlayStation Classic, Game Freak would have already heard the message loud and clear by that point. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with telling Game Freak these games are only worth $20. I think fans would have been a lot more forgiving of the quality if that's the price the games were originally announced at. Even though they probably would have been angry for completely different reasons. But even Pokemon games as polarizing as these are probably going to be damn near full price used anyway. So even if Game Freak doesn't see the profit, you're still paying $50 to $60 to dedicate 20 to 30 hours of your life into games that you're claiming are an abomination to all mankind. Which I just think is weird any way you slice it, especially when you're probably going to pay for Pokemon Home on top of that. And one scary thought nobody's really thinking about with this whole Sword and Shield fiasco is what Nintendo and Game Freak might assume if Sword and Shield do not sell Pokemon Let's Go. Also, if everybody has the mentality to consciously buy used copies, then that actually might make them more expensive than the new ones. I don't think enough people are considering buying used for that to happen, but if that ended up being the case, then I've gotta admit, word of it'd get around pretty quick, and Game Freak would be burned so badly that they'd need at least 1 billion Rossberries to recover from it. But would you really be willing to pay more for a used copy out of spite? It'd be kind of a double-edged sword if you think about it, because you'd be showing Game Freak that the quality of their game is worth more than full retail and 20 to 30 hours of your life, while also making sure they don't see a profit. They would hear the message loud and clear, but they'd also realize how much people need Pokemon. But that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as they try harder next time, and to be honest, I really think they will. There's a lot more that goes into new Pokemon games besides the actual games themselves. Every time a new generation comes out, it always coincides with a new anime, trading card game, and probably other stuff I'm forgetting about. So delaying Sword and Shield after the backlash had literally been impossible for them to do. The next best thing they could do though is to address all the fan complaints in the next games and to spruce the current games up as much as they can by November. That's not to say you should just buy Sword and Shield regardless if you're unhappy with what's being given to you, but I also don't think you should consciously buy them used out of spite either. I mean, if you're undecided whether or not you love or hate these games, then buying used would be a good middle ground, but I think that if you do that, you lose most of, but not all of your rights to complain about quality since you proved you're still willing to pay money and spend time on it. If you really are as unhappy as most people claim to be, then skipping out's the best way to ensure the same mistakes are never made again. But if you're still excited for Sword and Shield despite all the complaints, then just go ahead and buy it and enjoy it. But at the same time, you shouldn't tell people to blindly support something they're not happy with either. If the games are as good as the optimistic fans think, then they'll either sell out the ass regardless of the outrage and nothing will change, or they're gonna sell poorly and be even better games next time, so either way it's a win-win. Regardless of your stance though, just make your decision and let things play out naturally. If someone's not gonna buy it, don't try to force them to. But just know that if you buy it used out of spite, then your statement's not gonna be nearly as strong. And you also have to sign away 90% of your complaining rights. What am I gonna do? Well, I wasn't gonna say, but since I just asked myself in a way that implied somebody else asked me, I'll tell you. Long story short, I'm probably not gonna buy Sword and Shield at all. But even in late August, there's still a lot we don't know about these games, so I'm not gonna make a firm decision right now. I agree that the graphics should have been better, even if the games hadn't been started since June 2017, but if Game Freak didn't waste time on Let's Go and held off on Town for a little bit, they could have easily pulled it off. I get that it'd have been a stupid business decision to sacrifice Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but if nothing else, they should have used some of the profits from those games to hire more people to help make Sword and Shield look better and to help with adding more Pokemon. And speaking of adding old Pokemon though, I always kind of figured it was inevitable that old Pokemon would be cut from games at some point. I just didn't think it would happen this soon, especially with all the old 3D models and animations being recycled. Despite my gripes with Sword and Shield though, I'm really not any more disappointed now than I was with the previous games. I thought the series had been coasting for a while and nobody seemed to care, so I've just come to accept Pokemon as something that's always going to be pretty good, but I'd probably never be excited about it again. But even though I think Sword and Shield will probably be pretty good just like the last few games were, I'm willing to jump on the boycott bandwagon if it means Game Freak's gonna go all out next time. At the time of this recording though, it's still August, and I think Game Freak's consciously not showing the full game off just yet. I think Game Freak's trying to squeeze as many old Pokemon into Sword and Shield as possible to soften the blows, since they didn't really tell us what we're getting and not getting yet. And to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if October came and they said something like, you know what, we listened to the fans and decided that no Pokemon should be left behind. It makes sense they wouldn't promise something like that so soon, since they're probably not sure they could pull it off. But no matter how angry the fan base gets, I think they'll forgive all the sins as long as it's patched up by release. Delaying the games may be impossible, but if they're recycling old Pokemon models anyway, then I feel like it's possible to hire a few extra people to plug the hole in the boat, even within the 5 months between the E3 backlash and the launch date. After all, this is a billion-dollar franchise we're talking about here, and after Animal Crossing was delayed, I really don't think Nintendo wants to underperform in the holiday season. I mean, the latest gameplay we saw looked like it had a little bit more polish than what we saw in June, so whether or not they succeed at salvaging Sword and Shield, I do think Game Freak's doing everything they can to make it right, so I'm gonna wait and see what they've got before I make my decision on whether or not I'm gonna buy it. But you could bet your uncle's ass that I'm not gonna pay full price for a used copy out of spite, and I don't think you should either. What do you think about buying Sword and Shield used though? Do you think it sends the wrong message, or are you not that mad at Game Freak, but you still need to give him a warning spanking? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. But in the meantime, I'll tell you two people whose games I'd buy used copies of instead of new are today's patrons of the day, Curry Chicken Man and Michael D. If you want to be badasses like these two, then consider supporting FU Game Crew on Patreon for loot boxes in the mail and other wacky rewards. And if you want to make a cameo, then send pictures or videos of you rocking any FU Game Crew merch like these legendary human beings you see before you. As always, like and share this video anywhere on the internet to help this channel grow. And if you want to prove that you're not down with registered sex offenders, then go ahead and press the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, all one word, and I'll be back with more videos soon.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.